All right, Paul, thank you so much for being here. So based on your evidence from this round of research from the Young Lives Report, what are the three main policy implications of this research?
Okay, well, thank you for having us, first of all. I think the first thing I just want to say is actually why evidence matters for policy, and it really matters because evidence increases our chances of making policy that will work by understanding the circumstances that might shape children's later outcomes. So in a sense, that's the key reason for why it matters particularly. You asked about three policy implications, so let me try and give you three. I think the first one that I'd give you is just the central defining role that poverty plays in a lot of children's lives around the world, shaping with lots of impacts on different aspects of children's development, their health, their ability to engage with the school. So what does that tell us? Well, it does tell us that if poverty is important, then developing good measures to tackle that poverty is important. And social protection has been a really key issue being developed recently, and ensuring good coverage for households with children ought to be a really key priority. The second thing that I think I'd highlight is the central role of school within a lot of children's lives. They give a lot of time with rising enrolment rates, but with that comes a real responsibility on policymakers to make sure that the school's really paying off for children's later outcomes, that they're learning enough in school, and that's a really prominent issue in the world at the moment, recognising that often learning is not of great quality, and improving that is a really important aspect. The third thing I think I'd like to highlight is just talking a little bit about what we see around gender disadvantage. It's a big policy issue at the moment, a debate in many countries about when women particularly are disadvantaged. So we've been looking at that in the study and thinking about that. And I think the first thing that we'd say is that where we see gender gaps, they grow during adolescence. So that's a key time to be looking in policy terms about what's shaping later outcomes. But the second thing I'd say is that we need quite a subtle diagnosis of what the problem is, because when we look at, say, who's in school at later ages, in India, in Andhra Pradesh, where we collate data, boys, young men are much more likely to be in education at age 19 than young women. But that's not always the case in some of those other countries. Actually, in Vietnam, young women are more likely to be in education than young men. So diagnosing what the problem is at a country level is important. And then thinking about what you might do about that. Now, two things that I'd highlight there. First, poverty causes sharp choices to be made within households. If there isn't enough money to send everybody to school, then it's not perhaps surprising that households have to make choices. And that may worsen discrimination. So tackling that poverty may help. The second thing I'd highlight is that though it's important to focus on what's going on within childhood, and there's some important policy instruments to help support girls, or indeed sometimes boys, to do better, we've also got to see that in the context of wider societies. If women are not going to have great access to livelihoods and to labour market opportunities later in life, it's maybe not surprising that that determines earlier choices made about them. So in terms of addressing those gender disadvantages, let's look at what's going on in childhood, but let's also look at wider society as well.
Does the findings of these 4 rounds of study highlight low-hanging fruits in terms of policy measures that can be taken immediately?
Okay, well, I'd like to highlight 2 low-hanging fruit, really, as you call them. I mean, the first, I've talked a little bit about the role of the school in children's lives and the importance of making sure that that's paying off for children's later outcomes and is delivering better learning. But let's also think about other ways of using the fact that many children are now in school, and can we use it to help deliver other policy objectives as well? So we see some really interesting evidence around the impacts of school feeding in India. So can we use the school certainly for learning, but also for other policy objectives as well? So that's the first point I'd highlight. The second point is really very timely with the Sustainable Development Goals that are being discussed very much at the moment as what comes after the Millennium Development Goals. And some phrases that have been used have been around the data revolution. A data revolution to improve what we know about the circumstances of people within societies and what maybe policy can do. There I think I'd want to see that data revolution can pay off in increasing the profile of what's going on in children's lives, really. What we know from some recent World Bank figures is that nearly half of those experiencing extreme poverty in the world are aged 18 or younger. So children are not a special interest group. They're nearly half the overall, challenge in reducing that extreme poverty. So another thing for the low-hanging fruit is that data revolution can be used to increase the prominence of children within debates about policy development and development.
Okay, thank you very much.